Welcome to the Voices of the Learning Network, the podcast that connects and amplifies voices across the learning and development communities. I'm Bill Banham, a board member of the network and your host today, and I'm glad that you've been able to join us. In each episode, we bring you conversations with leading minds in L&D, sharing stories, insights, and strategies to how you shape the future of workplace learning. Today, we're diving into the brain and how neuroscience can elevate learning, leadership, and performance. Amy Brann is our guest, and she's a keynote speaker at this year's Connect conference. She's an expert in applying neuroscience to organizational learning and leadership. She's also the founder of Synaptic Potential, where she helps global organizations turn scientific insights into practical, people-centered results. With a background in medicine and years of experience working with organizations across industries, Amy brings a unique lens to how people think, learn, and perform. I hope you enjoy this conversation that I had with Amy. Amy, thank you very much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I am excellent. The sun is shining, which seems to be a rarity at the moment.
It certainly is. And you and I were having a lovely chat before we hit record today. I'm excited for this conversation. So let's get straight into it. You've spent many years helping organizations apply neuroscience to learning. What inspired you to focus on this intersection between science and workplace performance?
Well, I'd become fascinated with the brain from about 13 and then really started reading the chunky books from about 15. But I think what got me was when I went to my dad's law firm, and I'd gone to medical school by this point. I was doing some summer work there, and I realized that there were so many really smart people, but they were really quite stressed, and they were really working in some not so wise ways. They were ineffective, and it was just all a lot more friction filled than it needed to be. And I knew that it didn't need to be this way, because what I'd learned about the brain and was continuing to learn about behaviors meant that we could do things differently. And working with my dad, he believed that you could just tell people to do things and then they would do it. And he had learned that this was not the case, but hadn't got an alternative. And I wanted him to have an alternative, and I wanted other organizations. I presumed that others were having similar challenges. I also knew that the brain wasn't fixed. Neuroplasticity meant that we can rewire how we think, how we learn, how we perform at any stage. And so you can teach old dogs new tricks. And so I really wanted to just bridge that gap between the working harder with the working smarter, and help people understand that when you know how your brain works and you understand it, the performance can feel more sustainable. And I wanted to give people the comfort that challenges like procrastination or overload or burnout, they're not personal failings. They are brain states and processes that we can influence.
I love that answer. Thank you very much. What do you think, Amy, L&D practitioners most often get wrong when trying to make learning more brain friendly?
We can overload learners with too much information at once, forgetting the limits of working memory or what it actually takes to embed data. We've got loads of information about this and good evidence base. We can design for efficiency for us rather than effectiveness. We can cram content in instead of creating the space for reflection and practice and embedding. We can ignore the role of motivation and reward in embedding habits and recalls. And we can treat learning as a one-off event rather than something that is spaced, reinforced, and socially embedded. And I think my favorite thing that we have the opportunity to improve upon is to utilize the hot network and think about behavior change in general, rather than just default to the cold network all the time and the tell-based approach. So I think there is definitely some opportunities for us to tweak how we do things.
Okay, and quick point of definition there: hot network versus cold network. Can you explain that to any of our listeners who are not familiar?
Absolutely. So they are the neuroscientific terms that run in parallel with the psychological terms of System 1 and System 2 from Daniel Kahneman. The research was conducted independently, but it lines up. And I love it when neuroscientific and psychological and other disciplines all line up. So it's more utilizing the Homer Simpson type network rather than the Spock type network.
That's a fantastic answer. I love that. Okay, so some believe emotionally intelligent learning design can have more impact? What's the neuroscientific explanation for this, and how can we take it into account when designing learning experiences?
I find this a really fascinating question because I guess I wonder, what does unemotionally intelligent learning design look like, and why would we do it? And how do people learn if we're being emotionally silly or stupid about things? I think the exact answer will depend on what aspect of EI design we're referring to, because the brain is really complex. But some high level type things that we might want to think about. We know emotions drive attention. If people feel safe, curious, inspired, the brain tags the information as worth remembering. We know that the amygdala is right next to the hippocampus. So I think of it, it's obviously not literally like this, but I think of it as the amygdala giving the hippocampus a little nudge, pay attention, lean in. The amygdala and the reward networks light up when content feels meaningful, making it, again, more likely to stick. Our emotional states shape whether or not we can even access higher order thinking. So stress will narrow our focus, whereas positivity can broaden our creativity, our ability to draw on different ideas and bring them together. And so I think emotionally intelligent design means creating these psychologically safe spaces, which we hear more and more about, but linking it to personal purpose and building in stories and reflections. So I think there's a lot of evidence for saying that that sounds like a sensible thing to do, but I'd be really curious to hear what the counter argument might be.
Something we need to be mindful of, no pun intended there, is cognitive overload. But what are some practical ways that L&D can design learning that respects the brain's limitations while still delivering impact?
I think the first thing to do is analyze what the desired impact really is. Once you're clear on that, then you can be very targeted and specific, which is really good from a design perspective. General strategies can include chunking information into the digestible segments, shorter spaces with shorter sessions with the spaces for consolidation, and then ideally some scaffolding around what that consolidation looks like, because once you let people go, obviously busy people. The classic things like using the varied formats, the visual, auditory, interactive, social, practical, to reduce the overload and strengthen the neural pathways as you're doing it. To allow downtime, to give permission space for the default mode network to activate and to process and to connect. So we're not just having learning in the classroom, to build in the practice and retrieval into the sessions. We know that cells that wire together, wire together within our synapses. But I think a common theme that I'm challenging L&D practitioners on is whether people do need to learn something new or whether they need to change a behavior, because the strategies are really different. And if it's changing a behavior, then you can typically reduce cognitive load as part of the design very easily. And so we love designing these sort of different approaches to deliver impact rather than people sitting in front of a screen. But it can be still quite new and scary for many L&D people not to be designing a course as a solution.
Okay, it's that time of the conversation that we have to mention something that we at the Learning Network feel that perhaps is talked about too much, but it's very relevant to everything that we're doing. So we've got to talk about it, and that's AI and automation. AI and automation are changing how folks design and deliver learning, of course. From your perspective, Amy, what are the ethical or cognitive risks we need to watch out for?
Well, Bill, if you could put a step tracker on your dog, would you? I guess it kind of depends on what's important to you, right? Why you've got the step tracker in the first place. So outsourcing memory and thinking can weaken our own neural pathways if we don't stay actively engaged. We've got loads of research that would suggest that would be the case. We're starting to now get the AI-based research that is confirming what we already knew about how brains worked. We know that the cognitive overload from lots of new tools without guidance can mean that learners drown, and I think we need to be mindful of that. A big concern is bias amplification. If AI is delivering personalized content based on past behavior, it can narrow what we're exposed to rather than expand our perspectives, which is difficult and would need addressing and building in. And ethically, I think we've really got to think about protecting deep learning and human creativity. If AI is used, then we want it to be augmenting, not replacing our critical thinking. And I think we've also got ethical questions around training the next generation. If who's going to teach AI in the future if all of our junior humans are not getting the foundational task practice or thinking exposure and then building the brain networks that they need? Then what comes next? I know this is a challenge that the legal sector, among many others, are dealing with at the moment.
Yeah, I do fear for the folks coming into the workforce, and how they're going to learn and how they're going to develop compared to old fogies like me. But that's a conversation for another time. Next, can you perhaps share a favorite example of a learning initiative, Amy, that you've helped to introduce where neuroscience significantly changed the design or delivery for better outcomes?
Oh, I've got a couple. So we do a fair bit of work with C-suite leaders, and we're typically introducing them to the whole brain potential framework. So rather than just thinking about executive function and what we typically think about as brain, we're thinking about all of the networks and the ways that the brain needs to work. And for many of them, it's the first time that they realize, oh yeah, mind frames and behaviors and environments, they all interact and drive performance. And if we only tackle one part of something, we're missing the opportunity to influence and unlock the potential in everyone. And that then changes everything for them and then their L&D teams, because they're no longer just asking, oh, could you put a resilience training on for us? Or can you do a psychological safety workshop and solve all our problems? And they know that they can do other things, which is really impactful. We shift from a tell to an experience-based approach when we can trigger emotions that will lead to stronger recall and behavioral insight and change. And wherever possible, we, with organizations, utilize their existing insight internally. So we worked with Christian Louboutin, and it was with the senior team there. And what was brilliant is we could use Christian's own words that he'd put out publicly during one of their incredible fashion week shows that involved a pool and shoes, and it was incredible. And we could take what was internal knowledge and well established from people of influence internally and remind them of who they are, and then give them the science as to why it worked and why they needed to keep doing things a particular way. And I think that broadly works well. And then a final one, worked with a global finance company to transform their feedback culture. And they were brave. So they didn't default to the, oh, we must give everyone a training on feedback culture, which I can almost guarantee would have worked not at all, because their smart people already knew how to give and receive feedback. That wasn't the barrier, but they were more open to actually impact. And so the approach was more of a hot network activation approach rather than just the tell based when they already know what we need to tell them. So
Okay, love that. Thank you very much. Okay, my next question. I feel like you've touched upon this in other answers, but it's still a good question. So I'm going to ask it of you. However, I'm going to switch things up. I'm going to challenge you, Amy, to answer this next one in 60 seconds or less.
Yep.
Are you ready for it? Here we go.
Yep.
A lot of your work is about unlocking potential, of course. How can organizations support teams and leaders to think more expansively and perform more consistently? And let's do that in 60 seconds or less. Go.
Psychologically safe environments are a must. Link the daily work to purpose and contribution to activate the reward networks and intrinsic motivation. Encourage reflective practices, coaching feedback loops to strengthen self-awareness and agility. Invest in rest and recovery. Resilience isn't toughness, it's a brain state that needs to be invested in. And my biggest and least popular tip, which organizations are starting to switch on to and ask us specifically for help with, is to reduce cognitive load. Most organizations throw way too much at people.
Oh, what a pro. This is why you were one of the keynotes at Connect in November, which we're going to get to shortly. In fact, you're so good at that. I think I'm going to do it again. I'm going to challenge you with the next one as well, if that's okay. The next one's around neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is a fundamental part of learning. In 60 seconds or less, Amy, what does it actually mean, and what should L&D pros actually understand about it, and how can we design with it in the mind? So 3 questions in one, and do it in under 60 seconds.
Structurally, there'd be no L&D without neuroplasticity. It's the brain's property that enables it to rewire itself. 15 years ago, no one had heard of it. Today, everyone's heard of it, but do we really understand it? For L&D, no one's too old to learn. Our brain is changing all the time. My question's always just, are we intentionally shaping our brains, or is it just running away and doing what we're doing? From a learning design perspective, focus on repetition, feedback, and application to strengthen the myelinated pathways that wrap around our neurons in our circuits. But yeah, the key thing is design intentionally. That's what you need.
You work across sectors and cultures. Are there any universal truths you've seen about how people learn, or does context always override?
Oh, I want to say yes and no. So yes, context is always of utmost importance because there are so many variables between humans. However, I have worked in what are considered very different cultures, China to America, and everywhere in between. And I see the same problems everywhere. And structurally, broadly, the brain is the same. So universally, the brain learns better when information is emotionally engaging, spaced and socially reinforced. Stress universally impairs learning. However, what is stressful to you, Bill, is different to what is stressful for me. And we're in the same country with, probably broadly similar upbringings. So I know people hate it, but I'm going to say yes and no.
Okay, a politician's answer. I'll take it.
And the only one. Normally I give a lot more. It depends.
Two more questions for you before we do wrap up for today. The next one, as I briefly mentioned earlier, is listeners, get excited because Amy is one of the keynotes at the Connect conference in November, coming up pretty soon as we record this in early September. I'm very excited for it. It's going to be my second time at Connect. Can you maybe share a little bit about the session that you're going to be leading and perhaps some of the hope for learning outcomes?
Yeah, so I want it to be a really interactive session. So I want to share that your brain has different networks that help you do different things. And we need organizations to start unlocking the whole brain potential, not just the executive function potential, as it were. But I want us to dig into some conversations about what do you think you need from your humans? And what can we forget that we need from our humans? What we take for granted and we only notice the impact of once it's gone. We're going to look at the fact that the brains are adaptable, but how we can utilize that, how we can change these brains. But what we get our humans at work to start and stop doing will change our humans' brains. And these brains also belong to husbands, wives, parents, friends. And we've got a responsibility to ensure that their brains still work outside of work for these roles too, I think, but I'm interested to hear what you think. So my message is going to be that when we understand how our brains work, we can design more holistically and effectively.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And just finally for today, Amy, how can our listeners connect with you? So obviously lots of these lucky listeners will be getting to meet you in person in London at Connect, but for all those folks who can't make it, what's the best way to connect with you? Is that LinkedIn? Do you want to share your email address? Are you super cool and all over the TikToks and Instagrams and places? Tell us more.
I am not cool enough for TikTok, but you can find me on LinkedIn or you can email me directly. I'm really happy to connect with Amy at synapticpotential.com. And we've launched a podcast about making your brain work recently, specifically with L&D people in mind. So you could check that out if you're looking for more brainy type stuff too.
Excellent. Well, that just leaves me to say for today, Amy, I may be seeing you in just a week as we record this at Disrupt Birmingham. But in case I don't get to see you there, I'm very much looking forward to meeting you at Connect. But maybe we get to hang out next week as well. I love your enthusiasm. Thank you very much for being my guest today.
Oh, thanks, Bill.